Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of meetings for the next people to join. There's still more people joining, so we're going to start in about 2 minutes. And while we're waiting for the other people to join, it would be great if you could introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're based and which class you're with. Hello to Year 8 in Salford.
I'm glad they're there. I thought it was just us. Oh, good, they're coming in now. That's great.
Yeah. Tunbridge Wells, Year 7 and Year 8. Twyford, Gabriel. Oh, they're arriving in 2 to 4 minutes. Some Year 10s. We're going to start at 3 minutes past. Enniskillen. So we've got people from all over the UK. Brilliant.
So I was told to emphasise my London roots.
I know.
And now it's
Yes,
feeling that might not be the message.
No, I want you to emphasise your London roots.
London's as good as anywhere else. I agree.
Right, I can still there's still people joining, but I'm going to start at 3 minutes past. Woodbridge High School in London. Brilliant. Okay, let's make a start. Good morning. I'm Vicky from the British Council, and I'm the lead person at the British Council for Modern Foreign Languages in the UK. So the British Council teaches English all over the world, but we know that it's really important that young people in this country, learn other languages too. This event is part of London City of Languages Festival of Languages. London is the most linguistically diverse city in the world, with more than 300 languages spoken. And our London City of Languages aims to celebrate all of the languages that are taught and spoken in London. And teachers, please have a look at our website because there are some exciting events coming up and resources that you could use and so on. Languages are really important for the UK, for diplomacy, for the economy, and so on. But they're also important for individuals, for travel, for career opportunities. And if you learn a language, you don't just learn new words for things, you get to learn about a whole other culture. And we know that some of you listening will already speak another language at home, and that's an amazing skill and something that you should keep up. And if you can, get a qualification in. Those things are really important. So what we're going to do, we're going to hear from 3 speakers this morning, each of whom's going to talk about their own language learning journey. After each of them has spoken, we're going to have a 1-minute silence, and that's a chance for you to think of questions that you would like to ask that speaker and put them in the chat, okay? And then we'll have the next speaker and then the questions, next speaker questions. And then at the end, I'll come back and ask all of the questions that you've asked in the chat, okay? So that's how it's going to work. And so I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, which is David.
Hi, Sigmas. My name's David Lelliot, and it's great to be aura farming with you today by sharing some thoughts about how I learn and use languages. I low-key hope you all have a slay time. Okay, sorry, that was a bit skibbity. I'm going to stop capping now. That was also, I'll be honest, a bit cringy. You probably noticed, and I'm not going to do it again. You'll be very pleased to know. But hopefully you get the point. I made some effort to talk to you in your language, and one way or another, I hope I got your attention. And that, in a nutshell, is why we use foreign languages, to communicate more effectively with people. The medium is the message. By talking to someone in their own language, you communicate something much more than just the words you're saying. So, I'm David Lelliot. I was born and brought up in London. I went to school here, and it's always been home and somewhere I've returned regularly to live and work, even if I've spent quite a lot of time living elsewhere, as you'll hear. So I'm currently the Deputy Head of the Afghan Resettlement Department in the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, or just the Foreign Office, in London. But I've spent most of my career working overseas as a British diplomat, most recently as the ambassador in El Salvador. And I've also worked in the Middle East, in Africa, in India, in Mexico and Gibraltar. So what's a diplomat? A diplomat's someone who represents their government in another country, strengthening cooperation, helping British companies do business, supporting British visitors who have serious problems, etc. And it's not all about being nice to people. Sometimes it's about telling foreign governments to back off or pressing them to improve their human rights, etc. But I'm getting ahead of myself here with my language journey. So I started off studying French at school and later German. And I used both on occasional holidays in Europe. And then I picked up a little bit of other languages along the way while I was backpacking around the world. Some Spanish, Portuguese, even a few words of Hindi. And I had 2 Russian lessons at one stage, which was a great introduction to Cyrillic script. Then I decided I wanted to join the Foreign Office and be a diplomat. And being honest, I didn't know anyone in the Foreign Office. It was certainly not something that people from my school did, which was, my school was a local non-selective state school, and people I knew just didn't do that. But I just applied and I got in. So if it's something you're interested in, that's the route. Just apply. You don't need to know people. You don't need to be from some special background. And in my first year or two, I worked in London and I did some lunchtime courses studying French and Spanish. I then went to Iraq for 6 months on secondment to the UN, and that was my first time in the Middle East. And I came back from Iraq and I did an Arabic foundation course in London to prepare me for a job in Qatar. And I was doing political work in Doha in Qatar, mostly working with the government there, and also doing media and political work, media and press work. And I'll be very honest, I found my Arabic of limited use in my professional in my work, because it was of a level where I could do certain basic things, like I could phone a government ministry, introduce myself, say where I was calling from, what I wanted to talk about, make an appointment with someone, but I couldn't actually then go in and do a meeting in Arabic. But what I did found was Arabic was great for traveling around the Middle East. It would be a great way, obviously, of interacting with people, reading signs, icebreakers, etc. And it never completely went away. And although I've not done another, what we would call an Arabic speaker job, where they're really looking for someone who's an Arabic speaker, I've used my Arabic in a couple of other jobs in Juba. Don't know whether any of you know where Juba is. It's in the world's youngest country in South Sudan. And I've also used my Arabic in Khartoum in Sudan. And I think actually having Arabic helped me get that job, and with it a promotion. So in case anyone wanted to hear some very bad Arabic, اسمي ديفيد ليليت أتكلم عربي كنت أشتغل في الشرق الأوسط في دولة قطر بغداد وخرطوم كمان. And that means my name is David Lelliot. I speak Arabic. I worked in the Middle East, in Qatar, Baghdad, and Khartoum too. After Qatar, I went back to London and I learnt Spanish. And I did a full 6-month course in Spanish. And to be honest, that was much more useful than Arabic, although I'd studied Arabic for longer. with 6 months of Spanish, I could really get to a level where I could use it a lot when I started my job, which was in Mexico, promoting British business and helping them to do business there, helping UK companies. And being honest, it cost me a lot of effort initially to use my Spanish, and I'd really sweat through meetings, struggling with it. And quite often at the end of that meeting, my host, who'd done the whole thing in Spanish and let me do the whole thing in Spanish, would then stand up and say, "Oh, by the way, here's my degree certificate. I studied in Manchester," or wherever else it was in the UK. And they spoke wonderful English, but they let me speak Spanish. And that was a real blessing because it helped me to improve. And I also found what I loved about it was the access it gave me to books, to films, to culture, and of course, to people and social life. And I used my Spanish later on in Gibraltar. Although Gibraltar is a British territory and it's an English is the official language there, they wanted a Spanish speaker to have interactions with the Spanish government and media. And my Spanish then helped me get a job as ambassador, or the job as ambassador to El Salvador. And by that time, I was much more confident in using my Spanish, and I regularly gave speeches, did radio, breakfast shows, television interviews, and so on in Spanish. So again, if you want to hear something, me llamo David Lelliot, hablo español, he trabajado tanto en América Latina, en Mexico y El Salvador, como en Gibraltar. My name is David Lelliot. I speak Spanish. I've worked both in Latin America, in Mexico and El Salvador, and in Gibraltar. I've had jobs where I haven't used language, but used my language. I've spent 4 years in India where I did a little bit of Hindi, but didn't really build on it, to be honest. And that's my bad. And I worked in Liberia, which is English speaking. I'd also say my language journey isn't over. I'm currently studying Ukrainian, and that's part of an expanded Foreign Office language offer. When I joined, they offered what we call developmental language training in French, German, and Spanish. It was a very European-centric view of the world. And that range has now expanded. We do Portuguese, we do Ukrainian, we do Russian, Arabic, Mandarin, Japanese, and I think they're considering adding Hindi to that mix as well. And this is training that's accessible to anyone who works for the Foreign Office, regardless of what job they're doing or where they're planning to go. And that's a real sort of underlining of the value we place on language skills. Also, although I grew up monolingual in an English-only family, English-speaking family, I don't live in a monolingual family now because my wife is Mexican, and we speak Spanish to each other, and we are raising our daughters to be bilingual. They are now old enough and proficient in Spanish enough to laugh at my Spanish, but that's life and I have to live with it. And it's really important to me that they speak both their languages because that connects them to their culture and their heritage. And I hope at some stage will open opportunities for them. Because as I say, the Foreign Office, like a lot of other employers, really values staff who speak heritage languages. And I've seen several colleagues who grew up speaking Indian heritage languages go on and do postings in India and use them to great effect. But also in places like the Middle East. Just a couple of wider reflections on language before I finish. So firstly, the politics of language, really interesting. In parts of India, you're better off speaking English rather than Hindi because they regarded Hindi as an imposition from Delhi. So that's quite an interesting dynamic. And in South Sudan, English wasn't the colonial language, it was the language of liberation. And one of the things they were fighting for separation was to be able to use English rather than to have to use Arabic. So, you know, there are lots of different dynamics at play here. Don't be put off by languages that have different alphabets or scripts. Yes, it's another thing to learn, but to be honest, Arabic has 28 letters So it's not super complicated. And yes, I make mistakes, and there are different forms of the letters according to how they're written, what they're joined to. But you can learn an alphabet really pretty quickly. And things like Cyrillic or Greek is even more accessible. They have to beware sometimes of false friends, letters that look like one letter but actually say something else. Um, don't buy stereotypes. The French always get a really bad rap about, oh, they try not to understand you and they're really, if you don't say it perfectly. I've always found with my atrocious French that the French are really go out of their way to understand and to help me. Um, and I also think that languages bring you some cultural insights, as I mentioned, access to books, films, music, and insights sometimes into ways of thinking. But for me, it's primarily about communication, being able to interact with people, understanding a bit more about my surroundings, and be a bit more independent. And that's really what motivates me with languages. And it's also influenced my decisions to learn Arabic and Spanish because they have such wide application in terms of the variety of countries you can speak those two languages in. And they also, frankly, serve as entry points to other languages, whether that's French, Italian, or Portuguese, or other languages that use the Arabic script like Farsi or Urdu, where you can make out quite a lot if you've got some Arabic. So finally, in conclusion, does it matter if you aren't fluent? Nope, not at all. Even in Spanish, which is the language I'm most proficient in, I sound like an Englishman when I speak. But people understand me mostly. So please do have a go. Do as much as you can. Everywhere I go, I try to learn the 6 most useful words, which in my view are please, thank you, yes, no, hello, and goodbye. And you can do a lot with those, especially if you accompany them with a smile, a bit of imagination, some sign language and pointing, and plenty of goodwill. But you can build on that. You don't have to stop at 6 words. So learn a language, or better still, learn more than one. There are many things that you study that you might reach a stage where you just don't use them anymore in your life. That doesn't mean they're not important, I will point out. But you can use foreign languages throughout your lives, and they will open doors, whether that's professionally, socially, or culturally. So get stuck in, have a go, speak, be willing to make mistakes and get stuff wrong, and you never quite know where it's going to take you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was fascinating to hear about how you've been able to use languages in different ways, and it's helped you develop your career. And I also really agree with your advice to have a go and get stuck in and don't be worried about making mistakes. If you're always going to be worried about making mistakes, it's going to be very difficult to communicate. You've just got to really go for it. So, as I said earlier, we're going to have 1 minute's silence now, which gives you a chance to think about what questions you would like to ask David and to write them in the chat. And we'll come back for our next speaker in 1 minute. And our next speaker is Ailsa. Okay, so please write any questions for David in the chat, and we'll come to the questions at the end. Okay, now we're going to hear from our third speaker, and that's Gabriel.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to get this slide show up very quickly. Whilst I'm doing that, I'd like to say thank you to David and to Ailsa. Really interesting to hear your experiences. And hello to all of you who have joined us today, especially those watching from Twyford. Good to see you. So just give me 1 second. Sorry, Vicky, would you be able to see if you can bring the slideshow up from your end? Because I'm having a bit of trouble on mine.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Oh, actually, never mind. Sorry, I found it. Found it. Sorry. All good. Okay. So, my name is Gabriel Wyszynski. Can everyone see this?
Yeah,
That's it. Yeah.
Fantastic. My name is Gabriel Wyszynski, and I am a language teacher at Twyford C of E High School. So I teach French and Spanish. Those are my main two subjects. So naturally, languages play a big part in my day-to-day life. Lovely. So let's talk about where it all started. Now, once I was a baby, and I was very fortunate in my youth because I was born to a Polish British father and an Italian Armenian mother. So I had languages surrounding me from my very first day on earth. And luckily, my parents brought me up to speak both English and Italian. So I was raised bilingual, which was super helpful. Such a massive privilege to be raised with a home language because it makes the prospect of learning a language or pursuing a language much less daunting. You know, if you know that you can already speak more than one language, super helpful, not only for understanding the grammar and vocabulary of another language that might be similar, but also for the confidence it gives you. When you can communicate already in another language, it's super good for your confidence, and yeah, and it really shows. Yeah, learning to talk in both English and Italian, I also learned how to kind of differentiate between the two at a very young age. And naturally, that was really useful to me going on to study languages throughout school and through university. And as I say, home languages help, but it's really important to know that it has to be balanced out with hard work. You know, you can't rely entirely on you know, the privilege of already knowing a home language. You really have to work hard to kind of not get confused between the languages that you do know, because it can be confusing. I mean, I still make mistakes now with Spanish, for example, because pronunciation wise, it can be really similar to Italian. So often I kind of blur the line between the two. So yeah, hard work is super important, especially when you start to tackle trickier languages like Arabic, which I'll come on to in a second. But let's talk about what really inspired me. So that's what kind of enabled me to study languages. But what really inspired me, I've chosen to represent with these rugs. My dad worked as a rugs wholesaler, and I spent a lot of time growing up helping him out in his warehouse. And the way that started for him was completely by chance. He happened to find a job with a rug company, which my mum also came to the UK to work for briefly. So that's how my parents met. They met working for this rug company, and my dad didn't speak a word of Italian. My mum spoke very little English. Because my dad took a liking to my mum, he chose to learn Italian, which I found really inspiring. You know, I think that's really nice. Being able to learn a language purely because you want to communicate to someone on a deeper level. You want to communicate to their heart rather than their head. I think that's really meaningful, and I found that really inspiring. And eventually they married and they had me and whatnot. But besides that, kind of elaborating on what I said earlier, I was also inspired by hearing my dad speak to his family in Polish, hearing my mum speak to her family in Armenian, and having them both speak to me in Italian. As well as hearing my dad speak Farsi to his clients. That that blew my mind because, you know, I thought, how on earth can someone who's Polish and British be so fluent in a language that has no connection to your ancestry? I just found it really fascinating. So yeah, so rugs, they inspired me basically. That's where it all comes back to. And especially being in London, you know, meeting my dad's suppliers and whatnot, and just going out and about, you hear all these languages, as Vicky touched on earlier, you know, over 300 languages that are spoken in London. More languages than you can count, you will come across every day just by walking around the streets of London. So that also really inspired me. I want to be able to communicate with people in their language, and it's a consistent journey. It never stops. You know, you always want to learn more languages. But let's talk about my personal experiences with languages. So all these photos here were taken in the space of 1 year. This was during my year abroad at university between 2023 and 2024. And it took me through various highs and lows, as we can see, no pun intended. So started off in a hotel bar in Brussels, which was arduous work. I was working from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m. every morning, 5 days a week, and it was not fun, generally speaking. But I got to use my French a lot. I got to use my knowledge of other languages a lot, being in kind of the heart of the EU. I met people from all walks of life, and I learned how to make an extensive cocktail recipe book, which was, you know, pretty fun. But yeah, really like interesting experience, despite being kind of arduous, and helped me realize that hospitality isn't really for me. I can do it well, but I don't enjoy it that much. It was a valuable experience. I learned a lot, and I met a lot of people, and it was really interesting. So I spent 6 months there, in Brussels. Then for context, I studied French and Arabic at university. So that's where we come to the next picture. Following kind of 2 years of exams and essays and just an onslaught of hard work and mental turmoil, I eventually reaped the reward of my year abroad in Cairo. So I went to Cairo for 4 months to study Arabic there. This photo isn't taken in Cairo, as you might have imagined. This photo is taken on the top of Mount Sinai, where I did a little pilgrimage with some of my friends. And yeah, I mean, I was at my happiest, I think, ever in Cairo. It was so fascinating for me. It was my first time out of Europe, and it just blew my mind. It was such an incredible experience. It was so profound to be in a place where I think, especially in Europe, you're kind of accustomed to the fact that lots of people, not all people, but lots of people might speak English, and that's kind of, it feels like a safety net. When I went to Cairo, I was blown away by the fact that, and it sounds ridiculous to say it now, but I really was blown away by the fact that so many people couldn't understand a single word of any English I spoke. So it really meant I had to actually put the effort in, which is a super valuable experience. You know, we forget that native English speakers only represent 5% of the population. It's a very small percentage, and it's our duty to try and learn other languages. But yeah, Cairo, mind-blowing, amazing experience. Did a bit of traveling around Egypt, where my Arabic came in really handy. My Arabic's not great, but it was good enough to get by, which helped. And then finally, this last photo wasn't part of my studies on my year abroad, but I actually applied for a bursary, a travel bursary from my university to support my own journey with Spanish, and with a bit of Portuguese, and my own kind of spiritual religious journey, being a practicing Catholic. I applied for a bursary to fund a pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela. So I did a walk from Porto in Portugal to Santiago de Compostela. It was about 270 kilometers, which, safe to say, is very long. And it took me about 2 weeks. But honestly, such a beautiful, profound experience. Really great for practicing my languages, and really good for a kind of personal spiritual journey. I picked up a bit of Portuguese on the way, and I got to practice loads of Spanish, and it was amazing. As you can see, kind of really, really beautiful landscapes. I know most of the picture is me, but you can see that beautiful church in the background amidst all the fog. Yeah, really fascinating experience, really cool. And it just goes to show how many opportunities there are at university, when you do study languages. It's yeah, I basically got an entire extra trip funded, basically, through using my knowledge of languages as a kind of factor in that. So yeah, amazing. Felt very, very fortunate. Now, let me wrap up because I've kind of yabbered on for far too long. What other skills do languages give you? Now, I think the main thing is that languages allow you to apply your skills, whichever skills you do have, anywhere in the world. So I know people who study languages who went into sales, who went into marketing, who have gone into finance. And the fact is, lots of them are doing that work now in the UK, but it made the fact that they spoke another language or studied another language at university made them that bit more hireable, which has been touched on by both Elsa and David. So languages do make you a really valuable candidate, because anyone who employs you knows that you could work elsewhere, which makes you more valuable. So yeah, you're more flexible, you're more hireable. And as I said earlier, the main thing languages are given for me, the main skill is confidence. You know, when you can speak to someone in a language that you were completely unfamiliar with 2 years prior, it's really empowering when someone can understand you in a language that isn't your own but is their own, and is willing to communicate with you in that language. It's an incredible skill, and it really, really supports your confidence further down the line. And with fluency, I've put this picture here to kind of sum it all up. So I completely agree with David earlier when he said that fluency is not the most important thing at all with languages. It certainly helps, but you can speak a language well without being fluent. In this picture here, I've got two of my friends. I've got Jacopo on the left, who is Italian, and Oliver on the right, who's my friend from school. So when I took this photo, I'd known Oliver for 10 years and Jacopo for about 2 days. This was on the Camino. This was between a town called Pontevedra and Santiago de Compostela. And the reason I've attached this image is because Jacopo was not fluent in English. He was fluent in Italian, that was his mother tongue, so we were able to communicate in Italian, but he knew that I was traveling with Oliver on the right, and he put the effort in to speak a language that he wasn't as familiar with so that Oliver would feel included. He made himself understood with what he knew. He knew he wasn't fluent, but he made himself understood, and a friendship was formed with that between all three of us, which I think represents it all. You know, you can form a true meaningful relationship with someone without fluency. If you can do that, you can kind of do anything without fluency, as long as you're putting in the effort, as long as you're doing what you can and using what you know and trying to learn more. That's when languages are at their most powerful. So it's important to work towards fluency, but it's not important at all to be fluent. You should still just throw yourself out there and give it a go. And that is me done. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gabriel. That was really, really interesting, and really interesting to hear about your year abroad and how influential that was on you. And I hope that the people listening can think about whether they might like to do a year abroad at university. And that will now be slightly easier for you because the UK is now going to be back as part of Erasmus+. So think about a degree, that's any degree, but you could do a year abroad in that and learn a new language or develop your language skills. So 1 minute silence for Gabriel, and then we're going to come back and take all of the questions. Okay, so have a think of any questions that you've got for Gabriel.